Welcome this week to the new normal. I'm Brian Morrissey, and we're going to be talking about an issue near and dear to our hearts at Digiday, which is virtual events. We're doing a lot of virtual events these days. We actually have one going on right now, day 3 of our Digiday Publishing Summit live. So I want to bring in Gina Joseph. Gina, you are with VentureBeat. Welcome.
Hey, great to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
So where are you? Where are you? I have to ask. I'm back in Brooklyn. That's why everyone gets to see my my kitchen. Where are you? You're not in Brooklyn, are you?
Yeah, our offices are based in San Francisco, so I'm in the Bay Area in California.
Okay, great. Well, the lovely backdrop, and it's not like making you a silhouette, which is great.
Yeah, I mean, goes with the theme summary, right? We're in summertime, so I thought it's a good feel.
So I want to get into the virtual events. Obviously, in-person events are not happening. They might be happening like somewhere in Belarus or something, but like they're not happening here in the United States, and it looks like they're not happening for a while. And each of us is trying to figure this out, whether you're the New York Times or whether you're Digiday or whether you're VentureBeat. For those who aren't fully familiar with VentureBeat's history, give us the quick rundown.
Yeah, so VentureBeat covers transformative technology, and we actually have 2 core focuses that editorial naturally has gravitated to: AI and games. And so when you look at our readership, it's primarily business decision makers, so it's really become an influential platform. And so we're covering transformative technology to help business decision makers make more informed decisions. So we have our digital platform, obviously, where we publish our news. And then we have our events platform. And, every year we've had in-person events, our flagship event around AI, our annual event on GameSpeed. And, that's what we did last year. And, as you had mentioned, we're now pivoting to virtual. And I can dive into this a bit more later, but we've always had a digital tie-in to our in-person events. And so I think that's been one of the ways that we've really been able to transition to this new phase of how events are going to be run, and really just amplify what we've been doing on the digital side. Since we are a digital first platform, how do we take that value and bring the equivalency to virtual events and actually provide more value for attendees and partners involved?
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, VentureBeat is, I know it had Matt Marshall's B2B, but the business model is mostly B2B, yes?
It is B2B. And so, as folks may have seen in the previous slide, last year, we formally rolled out VB Lab. And that was an initiative that I helped lead at VentureBeat. And it was really focused on how we could be more strategic with our partners, and how we can be more strategic and thoughtful in how we're working with our partners and providing our influential platform. And so, 90% of our partners, whether Fortune 50 or startup, had, share that their number one objective was thought leadership, for instance. And so with VB Lab, we developed a thought leadership platform. And so it really, if you take a step back actually to the concept of what thought leadership is, there's a LinkedIn and Edelman study that talks about how thought leadership drives real ROI, but if it's done right. And so that latter is where we're coming in as advisors and this innovation hub, and working with our partners to figure out what does that content strategy look like, thought leadership strategy look like across different channels. How can you thoughtfully get in front of business decision makers and really work through the lens of a journalistic eye? And that platform, includes events, right? So what does that thought leadership objective and strategy look like for events, and how do we integrate it with our digital platform? So with VB Lab, we introduced the proven process, which has grown our branded partnerships by 400% and our event partnerships by 150% year over year. And the process is listen, ideate, and create. And now more than ever, is that process so important, because when we were just going into a shelter in place and in California in early March, which was right before our virtual event, marketers were really just pausing, especially in the B2B space when in-person events was their primary tool to get in front of their target audience, and that need to have an advisor to come in and ideate and help them develop innovative and custom solutions was really needed. And so we, felt that, I would say, between March and now, those few months, It's really just been that planning and ideating with marketers and how we're going to pivot. What's the best ways for you to be thoughtful throughout this process, and how can we develop, customize opportunities for our partners. So rather than saying, here's where, let's figure out where you can fit in. Actually, let me figure out what your challenges and objectives are, and let's work together to figure out best ways that we can thoughtfully go to market.
Mm-hmm. So, and I asked about the B2B because B2B business models are typically quite different from B2C. I mean, there's a lot of advantages in that, typically not as dependent on display advertising, for instance. You don't hear a lot of B2B players really complaining about LinkedIn, about Facebook and Google. They're more likely to complain about LinkedIn because it's more in their space. So, I mean, the audience is fairly small. And I don't mean that in a bad way, but it's a focus play. Yes.
It is a focus play. And I think that's where, the key opportunity is finding a partnership where it's very targeted and focused is going to be appealing to marketers. So it's, I recently read an article that talked about how marketers are not looking for partners who can do everything and reach everyone. Actually, I read it on Digiday yesterday.
Oh.
I was
going to say that sounds like a great article. You should have written.
Yeah, think for a second. I do read Digiday. I'm a big fan. But they're really looking to identify partners who can provide that differentiator and get them in front of the right audience, right? And that's even more important with the B2B space. It's all about lead gen. But then when you think about lead gen, what's the best way to go into that, right? So phase one of marketing strategies is always going to be thought leadership awareness, going to market. And the more effective you can be in that, the better quality leads you can get as you look through the funnel of building awareness and getting to, high quality leads. And so in-person events have always been a big tool for B2B marketers, when they're looking for thought leadership and lead gen. And so that's why, with VentureBeat, that is our key differentiators. We've really developed a platform where, buyers and sellers can come together, right? So when you look at reach and AI, who are you getting in front of? You're getting in front of 40% of our readership are C-level executives. And so you are getting, 80% are business decision makers. And so not only is it an opportunity for sellers to get in front of these key business decision makers, but how can you do it thoughtfully, right? And so that's where we're working with them together on with a VB Lab and developing that strategy.
So, I mean, you're solving problems that Facebook can't really at their scale, right? I mean, like at the end of the day, and that's the advantage of a B2B model. Now, a sort of disadvantage of it is that events are typically a large portion of a B2B model's portfolio. What was the revenue pie? I always ask for people's revenue pies of VentureBeat sort of BC before Corona, like last year. Like, what are the percentages I don't know how you slice it up, whether it's advertising, content, events.
Yeah. So 50% of our revenue was from events. And so, that was, and it still is a big focus for us this year. And, as we look at our 5-10-year plan, right? And so it's interesting because I mentioned earlier that even with our events, we've always had a tie-in with digital. And so that's where we've been able to provide a lot of value to our partners and attendees, because it's not just about participating at an event and making a splash. We're a media organization, right? You could get news coverage. We're publishing content in real time. We're amplifying it on our news platform. We have this online community. And so now with virtual events, it's even more important to develop that pre, during, and post-event strategy, right? You have all this incredible content. How do you continue to engage this community that we were really activated through our events and our online platform? And that's one of the things we've really amplified with our virtual event strategy is, this is content that is now accessible to anyone in the world, and it's on demand. And now this is all, content that our partners can take and, utilize with their efforts, and they have something to point to. So it's no longer about, reaching the people in the room who, are physically at the event, but the scale that you can get with virtual events, because with how many attendees can now tune in without having to worry about restrictions of, can I travel? Can I fit this in my schedule? And just creating opportunities against that.
So let's talk about, I just saw it on there, the VentureBeat's Summit, because, when this really hit, look, all of us were scrambling. We had events planned, and then, it was like, "Ooh, is this going to happen? Is this going to happen? I don't think this is going to happen. Oh God, this is not happening." So this was planned in late April. When did you recognize that the VentureBeat's Summit 2020 was absolutely not going to be in person?
Yeah, I think it was about 3 weeks, 3 to 4 weeks before the event, where we realized that this was just when everything was happening. We released a press release that we were actually going to host an event with precautions of how we were going to host it, and then things were rapidly changing. And then it was about 3 to 4 weeks before the event where we announced that we're going to go fully virtual. And so you can imagine, how do you transform and shift that within that short window? And it's incredible. And I'm proud to share that the team, we were able to execute it, and we have the same lineup of speakers, the same content, and we did not downsize in terms of content and delivery of what we were going to plan to bring at that two-day event when we did go virtual. Certainly there was learnings that we found from it, but also incredible data points that we got from it that proved out that virtual events can be more effective and valuable than in-person events. So over 120 speakers. We had 2 live stages running simultaneously. The speakers, attendees, sponsors were incredibly supportive during this time. They all stayed on board, and we actually, signed on more sponsorships within.
I'm sorry, let me just jump in, because you talked about money. You made as much money off the virtual event as you would if it was in person. Congrats. Because look, virtual events have a lot of advantages, and you mentioned a few of them. One being you can scale them. Not everyone can go. Was this planned on being in San Francisco or the Bay Area?
This was actually going to be at Two-Bit Circus in Los Angeles. And so we hosted there last year, and we were planning on doing it there.
So not everyone can go to Los Angeles. Not everyone wants to even. But everyone around the world can go to a virtual events platform. The costs are far lower, right? There are technology costs, but it's not the same as renting a ballroom and all the costs that are associated with an in-person event.
That is true. So that's one part of it, but the I guess you would say the irony, or when you look at kind of the P&L, the work that is put into virtual events, I've learned by any means is no less. It is actually a lot more work, and so that is something to keep in mind. Is okay, you see an opportunity. Oh, you don't have to worry about venues or food or things like that. But the structuring of actually executing a virtual event, and then creating that event, and then you look at the value that you bring, with digital events and how that equates to in-person events. And what's interesting is, I think marketers initially, because virtual events was so new, their first reaction is, oh, I probably, will have to spend less money to be a sponsor. We did not lower our sponsorship levels for virtual events.
Wait, for this particular event, because I want to get to the 4, because there's one thing when you have money already into an event and being able to keep the money in the event. But it's another thing when you go out to the market with a different product. Because this was more you're substituting, for an obvious reason, a digital product when people have bought an in-person product, right?
Right. So So we're actually planning another fall event for VentureBeat, and we usually do annual events for VentureBeat, but because of the success, we're going to do a series. And so when you look at the value of the sponsorship levels, to answer your question, it's going to be equivalent to what our sponsors were spending for in-person events. And that is because we are actually going to be more effective and generating leads, providing opportunities, and everything is scalable. And now you have metrics at hand. So as a marketer, I started out in a marketing role. Now, if you invest into events, all of a sudden you have these clear metrics, right? How many people did I reach? Who engaged? And those are metrics that are difficult to measure with in-person events. You have a big banner in a room. Well, if you have branding with our virtual events, we can actually give you clear metrics and expectations and exceed them. And then with lead gen, it's interesting because you no longer have to worry about physically how many people can I meet at the event, interrupting conversations. Everything is much more accessible with virtual events where attendees and partners can very conveniently direct message one another. And over the 2-day course of the event, we saw over 12,000 Slack messages. And about 70% of those were direct private one-to-one messages. So our Slack events channel for GamesBeat was on fire. It completely exceeded our expectations, and it actually turned into a forum for the gaming community. And then on day 2 of the event, we announced, like, look guys, we're going to keep this forum up for you guys. And due to the demand and what we're seeing here. So we had over 700 executives, in the Slack forum, really actively participating. And even myself, I got to connect with so many more attendees and speakers with a virtual event than I physically could have, had been able to do with in-person events, right? You can only be at so many places at one time. And so
I think it's interesting that you talk about the lead gen aspect being just as powerful, because it seems like that's the hardest part of transitioning from an in-person event to a digital event, because that networking aspect of people all being in one location, the sort of serendipity of the coffee line and over stale croissants. I don't know, maybe you found a digital way to recreate the stale croissants. Now that there's stale croissants at Digiday events, they're always the freshest croissants. Sound like Trump. But that seems like the hardest aspect. That doing the sessions, and there's technology involved, and it is tricky, but doing the sessions in a virtual environment can be better, really. Explain a little bit more how you can assure marketers and show them that they're getting the same, if not more, value from that critical component of the event.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one great example is with in-person events, we would host private breakfasts and lunch and dinners for our partners, and and bring together 25 of their top prospects in a room and have a very thoughtful conversation with VentureBeat as a co-host. And so this is a very valuable lead gen opportunity, especially for B2B marketers, because you get 25 highly targeted leads and in person. And so we replicated that with virtual events. And so we essentially host virtual roundtables and inviting those executives along with our partner in VentureBeat hosting. And these are folks who want to be in the room, right? Thought leaders. And another thing I want to mention about GamesBeat is we have a really great sense of community. And so these are folks who come year after year, and they know they can come to VentureBeat events and make deals and meet the right folks. And they know they can get great content from the thought leaders who are speaking. And so one of the data points and learnings from GamesBeat is that those virtual events, our partners actually shared that they were more effective than in-person events. People were speaking up more, and it was much more engaging and intimate. And the conversation continued, after that. It felt more casual and more effective for sponsors, and they were more effective in their follow-ups, continuing that conversation. So I think that's a great example of how what we were doing essentially for in-person events, we are doing now for virtual events, and then we're hearing our partners saying this works better. It works better for us. And then what other opportunities in terms of lead gen, it's just about getting the right folks in the room, right? So targeting the right audience, to tune into their speaking sessions, scheduling one-to-one meetings. We are going to have a virtual expo for Transform, which is going to be really neat and interesting, where they're, folks can have someone manning the booth, and attendees will go in and they can do a live chat via video. They can download assets right away. So you think about a booth, and people come to your booth, and they might wander around and get information, but you're gonna have to direct them to go visit your site and expect them to take that next step to get more information. But all of a sudden, everything is really accessible in the tip of your hands, and it's there, and you can engage with them right away and very thoughtfully, right? And there's a lot going on, and then events and a lot of distractions. And I think that one-to-one connection makes it really personalized. And these are details that, was really important to think through, like how can you thoughtfully bring that human connection to the digital world? Another great example, because it's not just about, lead gen that we're thinking about or thought leadership, but what does that strategy look like for content? So our speakers, after they speak, we have a live Q&A following them. So even if it's a pre-recorded session, we always have a live Q&A, so that attendees get that same opportunity to ask questions. So there's a 5-minute live Q&A, and then following that, imagine as a keynote speaker would get off stage, you have a few folks who may approach you, as you're walking down the hallway to ask more questions. We've created that replication and really just thought through those details with virtual events, and so there's an extended live Q&A where you can go to a different room and ask questions.
On that, I just want to jump in real quick. Please do use the Q&A function. Thank you for reminding me of that. So the margins must be better then.
They are, and I think one of the reasons is our ability to come out of this, stronger based off of what we've seen so far, and really be able to deliver on the value, right? Unfortunately, there's been a lot of events where they haven't been able to reschedule or go virtual because it was purely an event company, right? There wasn't an online community or a digital platform to fall back on, and so one example would be with VentureBeat being recognized as the #1 publisher in AI news by TechMeme. It comes with the responsibility to, put a spotlight on some of the most important conversations, such as women in AI, the growing challenges behind that, diversity and inclusion, ethics in AI, some topics that I'm actually, really passionate about myself. And so, creating that digital platform was just so important for us to take on that responsibility and provide a place for these conversations to happen, despite the fact that we can't come together in person. So that was a really driving factor, is just really ensuring that we do continue these conversations in a very thoughtful way and allow a place for, the community in AI and games to come together to have these conversations.
So we did get a bunch of questions beforehand, and I just wanted to dip into a few of them. There was a few, this is inevitable, and I was going to get to this myself, but it was submitted. Everyone wants to know the platforms that you're sticking together, because everyone, who was in the in-person events business was all of a sudden in the events tech business. And, there's a lot of platforms out there. I think Hopin just closed a big round of funding because they're trying to, is it Hopin? They're trying to keep up with, because everyone is trying to figure this out. We're on Zoom right now, but what's the events tech stack?
Yeah, great question. So we were actually, looking into different platforms that would be a great fit for Transform. And we announced just a few days ago that we are excited to partner with Team. And so what we were really looking for in an events platform for Transform specifically is just having an opportunity for attendees to join the event on a unified screen where everything is accessible in one place. You can go tune into the live sessions, you can chat, network, visit the virtual expo. Due to the success of the Slack community that we built out with GamesBeat, we are going to have a corresponding event Slack group for Transform, and we usually kick that off, right before the event. And so that becomes a great forum for the AI community and executives to connect during the event and post the event as well. So it's really about figuring out best ways to bring that community together. For things like virtual roundtables, we're going to have executive forum roundtables where those are going to be invite only, VP level and above. It's a spinoff of VentureBeat's VB Summit event, where it was considered Silicon Valley's most intimate event of AI thought leaders who would come together to have frank conversations. So we're going to be hosting those on Zoom. But what's great about Tame is all those links are going to be on one unified screen, and you can access it, and then it just redirects you to Zoom. For GameSpeed, given we
so like you wanted to have one platform rather than cobble together a few different, because I mean there's a way you can go where like for the interactivity you can use something, and like you can actually try to cobble together a bunch of different solutions, but as much as possible you wanted to have like, I'm going to use terrible, like full stack.
Yeah, I mean that's a good way to put it. It's just about thinking about the attendees experience and just making everything accessible. So another thing to keep in mind is virtual events is new to a lot of folks who are tuning in, right? They don't know what to expect, right? How do I access things? And so just making it really clear and easy to access content network, are things that we considered as we decided, which platforms to use. We do like a tutorial video that's accessible in the beginning for folks who want to just get an idea of how to access what. So the event is going to be for Transform, will be live streamed and accessible to anyone in the world. As long as you register, you can watch the live stream session. And then if you purchase the pass, then you get access to perks and VIP events. And then you get access to the events platform, networking, live Q&As, being able to join the Q&As for the Women in AI breakfast or the diversity and inclusion breakfast.
So, I mean, so if this was happening in person, obviously in order to gain access to it, you would need to buy a ticket.
Right.
Okay, so you're sacrificing ticket revenue.
Well, I wouldn't say that, because our in-person events the keynote sessions would be live streamed, so anyone could watch that, right? So the benefits of the event in terms of content on demand, networking with folks, and attending invite only or exclusive events where you do need a pass, those are still going to be available to those who purchase a pass. And so yes, to one extent, we will allow for more folks to participate, because we are scaling out now. Every single session is going to be live streamed rather than just the keynote session. So with our in-person event, we had 7 simultaneously stages running at the same time concurrently. And so now we're going to have one speaking session on the main stage at all times. And then the breakouts will go into invite-only roundtables. So as someone who hasn't purchased a ticket, you can access a lot more content. And because we've, have been very executive focused for their conferences, our events have always been intimate on purpose. Attendees, speakers, and partners, they really like the intimacy to be able to, get an opportunity to talk to everyone in the room. So, our executive conferences have ranged from, a limit between 200 executives to 750. Now we're still able to create that intimacy by having smaller breakout groups and roundtables, but also able to scale out. So now we don't have those limitations in terms of how many folks we can reach and hit both objectives, right? Create the intimacy and allow anyone around the world to access the content. And it gives us more opportunities in terms of diversification, getting more folks to tune in. So we are expecting, 50 to 60% of the audience to tune in internationally, and not just US based, which is, equivalent to our online readership as well. And, speakers, right? So speakers, there's no longer the challenge of figuring out, can they fit this in their schedule? Because it's an in-person event, you have to travel. Accessibility becomes a big opportunity with virtual events. And I think all the takeaways and findings that I'm sharing is not, just respective to VentureBeat. Any media company can really apply these takeaways and these strategies to really identify best ways to host a virtual event. And one of the things that we're doing as part of VentureBeat Lab is creating custom virtual events, so providing events as a service. So, I have some partners who, we're planning on hosting these large events or having a big presence at a large gaming or AI event. And now, they're working with us with VB Lab to identify ways for us to be a media partner and host that event for them from production to managing the technical aspect to content strategy execution. So
that's a new business line, or had you been doing that for in-person events? Or is this like new because they saw that you were able to do these and do them well and stuff, and they said, hey, we need to do our own because look, technology companies all have their own events.
Yeah. No, great question. I think it's a combination where we've always had a customized approach and created custom ways, but now we have a focus right on that because of the demand and what we're seeing, what our partners are facing in terms of challenges. So, I have worked with a few partners who were supposed to have a big presence at a couple of big gaming events, and we brought those speaking sessions and that content to VentureBeat through a series of content articles. So sometimes it's not a virtual event. And working with them through VB Lab, it's identifying, okay, well, how can we, take those objectives and create a very innovative and thoughtful way for us to fulfill on it with an online platform. Is it an event? Is it a fully custom virtual event? Or could we have a series of content that we publish or a series of video interviews? What does that really look like? And I think, that's been one of the key strategies to VentureBeat Lab is having that process, right? Ideating and developing best ways to develop that go-to-market strategy and align it with key objectives and challenges that our partners are facing.
Yeah, I think that's like so smart because I think sometimes in adapting the in-person events to the digital events, like it's possible to like lose sight of the fact that like the problems that in-person events solved for your clients have not gone away, right? The problems are still there. The question is, how do you solve for those problems? It can be different, right? And
I think that's a great point. I think one of the things that personally prepared me for this new normal, right, and adapting events is, I've been in the media industry for over 12 years now, and I started out working for the Daily Californian when I was at UC Berkeley, and it was very much like a startup-like environment where I learned a lot, how to run a media company, develop strategy, how do we pivot from, print to digital, right? So just setting up the display ads, what is it, 300 by 250? And so adapting to a new normal has been something that I've faced, these past 12 years. And it's actually been a big critical part of my role where, after that I joined Digital First Media and then was at Hearst for a few years. And my role was, to work on digital strategy. How do I help the team develop ways where we can go to market and the company develop new revenue opportunities when we're transitioning from, traditional print to digital? And then how do you transition from desktop to mobile, right? Cross-platform. So, things are changing yesterday in our industry, in the marketing industry. Things are changing rapidly. Consumer behavior changes, right? How do they digest content on different platforms? So this, adapting to a new normal is something that I feel like our industry has always faced, and it's almost, nothing has really prepared us for this pandemic, and definitely not comparable. But I think it is one of the things to look back on, as leaders look at ways to adapt their strategies to the new marketplace and look at ways to come out of this stronger. That innovation and those experiences in the past, I think the media companies have faced are great learnings in terms of what you can do, moving forward. And I truly believe that events, even after in-person events will be available, or we can come back together again. Digital events will always be around because of the value that is coming out of this. I think it's truly going to change the events industry It'll be really interesting to see how it plays out.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I mean, we always talk about, coming out of this with a new set of products, like, not just going back to just in-person events, but complementing it with a new set of digital events products. A couple of audience questions touched on the bridging that divide. I mean, let's face it, the virtual world is not the physical world. And so are there any tricks, was asked, for making a virtual event feel like an in-person event? Like any small or not small tips when it comes to doing that?
That's a great question, and I think we spend a lot of time talking about how virtual events can be effective and valuable, but there's no doubt that there are things about coming together in person that just won't be the same, right? But going back to objectives that marketers can hit, we know that we can fulfill on those, regardless if we're going to be in person or not. And so bringing that human connection thoughtfully to the digital world, it really comes down to personalization, right? Like how can you feel connected with other attendees and with speakers and with the media organization hosting this event. And so the more you can find ways to connect with every attendee, yes, every attendee, and what does that really mean? It's just creating opportunities for them to participate and not just be behind a screen, right? Being thoughtful about what their day looks like. So we have breaks in the agenda where we encourage people to get up, walk around, network. We will actively reach out to attendees during our Slack community, and just asking for their participation and input is really important. And in hosting virtual events, you just put yourself, I take myself out of kind of my marketing strategy role, and as someone who attends a virtual event, what do I want to get out of it, right? How can I feel like it was valuable to me? It's not just about the content that we're bringing, which is a big part of it, right? People are tuning in because they want to learn and they want to hear from these, incredible thought leaders. But, what are ways that we can make them feel like they were a part of the event? And so as much as you can personalize that experience for the different communities you're bringing together, I think that will go a long way. Those small details do matter. And we have these communities that we're bringing together. For instance, at Transform, Women in AI, there's going to be over 200 women, our second annual event. They're all really excited, right? And so just understanding, and we also do outreach to our attendees, and it goes back to the VB Lab model, right? Listen, we want to hear from you. What's important to you? What do you want to get out of this event? What are the pieces of content that you find really valuable, or what do you want to learn more about? And creating those connections for them, making introductions, inviting them to roundtables or discussion groups that identify with interest in topics that they were interested in. So the more we can show that we listened and then execute on that, I think it really just shows that we care. And authenticity is just so big. I've always been really big on keeping authenticity top of mind when you're developing any strategy, because it just is a way for you to create that loyalty with your audience.
We got a few questions about Zoom fatigue. Not that there be any Zoom fatigue on the new normal, but let's face it. I think when this thing happened, we all went into lockdown. It was like Zoom, 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 and it was like nonstop. Now I notice people are going back to the phone and just like, oh my God, enough. Is there fatigue? I mean, there are so many virtual events out there. This was asked a few times. Like, for instance, we continue to hear that people have virtual fatigue. They're tired of online events. How do you combat this and keep people engaged?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I think, we can all relate there. And so Zoom is going to be, something that we'll use for things like the invite only roundtables where there's, 15 to 30 executives. And we use Zoom because it's a great platform where everyone can come on video. Everyone has Zoom, easy to access. And so, next year, 2 years from now, there's going to be so many other platforms who are going to be competing with Zoom, Tame, and Hopin. There's going to be so many options. So I think it's right now it's identifying best ways for folks to come together. And there's a huge marketplace and opportunity for that, right? To tap into that.
What about like, getting over people? Like it's tiring constantly, like watching a screen. Like,
Yeah.
so are you seeing? I think when people were the novelty factor of anything is people give it a try, and they're like, it's pretty good.
Yeah.
But then it gets tiring. I think this is what a few of these questions.
Yeah, I think with it does become different with virtual events. I could share my experience like with GamesBeat just as an attendee. I was just engaged throughout the day. I had so much to do. I had so many opportunities to connect with people, watch these speaking sessions, watch people participate in the live Q&A. So I think it's a different where, we're logging into a meeting and it's hosted on Zoom, or you're just watching, a talk or a webinar. But with an event, there, especially with Transform, and maybe this will help the fatigue or the answer of how do you make it less boring. There's so many things going on, so many exciting initiatives. Like we're kicking it off with Women in AI. There's lots of networking, Q&A. It goes into our morning keynotes. Our breakout sessions, we're going to have keynote speakers from some of the most innovative brands. And then, we ended up with VentureBeat's AI Innovation Awards. Day 2, bringing diversity and inclusion at the forefront of the conversation for the second year. And then, day 3 ends with the Women in AI Awards. Every day is going to have a different summit. And so it just goes back to, again, that personalization. And with events, it's if you're hosting an event and all you can do is just watch a talk and 2 talking heads, yeah, there's only so much time you can really dedicate to that, right? But if you are providing access and ways for folks to participate and have different ways to do that, then it becomes a completely different experience than just having a Zoom hangout. So I do think there's a clear differentiation in terms of those experiences. Definitely recognize the fatigue with what folks are having on Zoom.
Not that people are having here. Not one person has dropped off, I might add, since we started. And so do use the Q&A. We had one come in from my favorite regular attendee, who is an anonymous attendee. And anonymous attendee said, Gina, where do you think events will go from here? Do you feel as though events will ever go back to normal pre-COVID, or are virtual events the future? Or is it some yes and no, it's a hybrid, right?
Yeah, well, what I heard is, do you think events will go back to normal? And so, I think what's going to happen is events are going to transition to a new normal. And even post pandemic, when things, will get better. And the reason I say that is because of the opportunities that have been identified in terms of how effective you can create an influential platform for thought leaders to come together, lead gen, awareness, tracking, measurability. So yes, there will be those in-person events where it's going to come back. You think of those really large events where they can't really pivot to fully virtual. There will be a time where those are going to come back. But I'm very confident that going forward, every event will have a huge digital tie-in, even if it's fully in person, and that we're going to have a calendar full of virtual-only events. And so I would say it's going to be a new normal. And it, you just look at as an exciting element to how we can expand opportunities for people to come together, right? So no longer having limitations in terms of who can participate and engage in your event because it's in person, and having more inclusion because it's now virtual.
Yeah, that is going to be a fascinating one to see. Are you expecting there to be no in-person events this year?
Yes, we are currently not planning on having any in-person events, and I think that's the right thing to plan towards. And so initially we were looking at hosting a series of virtual events where it would have smaller intimate groups tied into it, but until we get to that time where we know that's something that is okay to do, then right now we're just planning to definitely be fully virtual and digital in our efforts.
Yeah, it's going to be really fascinating to see. I see like Demexco and Money 2020 are just like, we're doing it. We're having big trade show events this year. It's happening. I mean, Demexco's in Germany, maybe that's a little different, but Money 2020 in Las Vegas, they're having it.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because a lot of our writers and writers at other media companies, right? What do? They cover these big tech events, and so that changes the dynamics for them, right? How are companies and technology companies going to be rolling out products now? And they are leaning into digital and virtual, and so yeah, it's. I hope things, obviously, like everyone, we hope that things will get better so
Yeah.
that we come together. But it's always great to identify ways that we could get better at what we do as well, right? And so this, now we've identified more effective ways to host events that we never really looked into. And so we're no longer limited to what we can do to in-person events.
I mean, I think tying back to what you said before, I think a lot of this is events companies that don't really have media brands, right? They don't have a digital hub to
Right.
convene the community. Because I mean, events, I think, are, look, they're an opportunity to convene a community. Like if you do it in person, great. But you can convene communities in all sorts of different ways. It doesn't have to be in a hotel ballroom. But if you're just an events company, maybe it does need to be in a ballroom.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think for to your point, we did have a fallback because we're a digital first news platform, right? And we have this on community that we engage with on a daily basis. But for those who don't have that, there are ways to come out of this. And so you just have to really think through your strategy there, and to your point, the communities that you could start creating online.
Mhm.
So I wouldn't discourage those events companies to feel like this is a lost opportunity and
Yeah.
to stop. I do
Yes.
think ways you can do
Although I think there's, but like I think events companies like gave up on like the content quote unquote side because they saw the margins in events were so much better, and they got caught short because of it. And so they got a little greedy with just doing all events, and they forgot the value of content. But I'm biased in that. A couple of just very tactical questions. How do you determine the right blend of pre-recorded and live?
Yeah, great question. So right now, as a best practice, we do encourage our speakers to have pre-recorded sessions. It just makes obviously things easier on the technical side. Um, and so we're actually not handpicking really which go live and pre-recorded. We just work collaboratively with the speaker to see what's the best fit for their talk. Some folks prefer to go live fully. Most are pre-recording. It is a best practice to try to pre-record as many sessions as you can. That's one of the takeaways that I've shared here. And so I think things like, if you were to identify, in terms of a strategy, what do you keep live? Obviously, Q&A, you have to be live so that folks can participate in it. But things like the Women in AI event, right, where people are tuning in and you have over 200 women and we have a live panel discussion and welcome your remarks and closing, that something like that should definitely be live, and which is what we're doing, right? So it's a real replication of what we did in person, where women came together in this breakfast. Now we're bringing it online to this community. We had over 100 women on a Zoom hangout for GamesBeat, and it was just amazing to see that. And so those are the kind of things that you definitely want to go live with. Your opening remarks. Obviously the moderator, the MC is going to be live to keep everything feeling like it's in real time. And the our awards ceremony will be live. And so
So like, what's the rough breakdown? Like take Transform, like how much is going to be pre-recorded versus live?
I would say that about 70% is going to be pre-recorded of the speaking sessions. That's the big bulk of it. And then of the other community gatherings or special events that I mentioned, all of those will be live.
Right.
All the speakers will be tuning in live to host a live Q&A. The roundtables, executive forum, all of that will obviously be live because it's a live discussion with all the executives. So, like we've seen with other virtual events with other companies, most of them will have pre-recorded session, especially if it's a keynote. I think it's appropriate to do that because it's.
So explain, I mean, what is the advantage of pre-recording is just you have more assurance that things won't go wrong, or what?
Sure, that's one big part of it, right? When everything is recorded on video and it's live, and so it's much different with a virtual event. But another thing is because virtual events are a lot more work. It's even more crucial for cross-functional teams to collaborate, to develop that pre-strategy, post-strategy. And so as much as you can plan ahead and have pre-recorded sessions, then it's just like one thing you can check off the list so that you can get really good at executing on everything else that's happening. Have a 3-day event.
Can you explain a little bit more, the more work, not less work, to host a virtual event?
Yeah, absolutely. So you would think that with one example would be like content, right? You have a speaker who's scheduled to speak, or a partner who is participating in various ways. There's so many details that lead into that in terms of like what are the best practices, having prep calls, developing the content strategy, and then actually recording the session, and then how do you distribute this content online? How do you amplify it in real-time news? What does that social strategy look like? How are you engaging with your attendees? So there's a lot of moving parts. The team that you need to plan for and execute a virtual event does not get smaller. Actually, you will need more resources and more people behind the scenes, backstage, helping speakers get into different rooms to go live, helping with, a whole team for troubleshooting, and so forth. And so it's really that strategy that, where you're working with your partners and we're working internally on what does that distribution strategy look like, that content strategy, how is it different, going to be different online. So there's a lot of details that you need to think through. For instance, an award ceremony, I think it's pretty simple where, with an in-person event, you're going to have a stage, you're going to present the awards, and you have, over 200 people in a room, you'll serve dinner. What does that look like online? So many details tied into that. What does that post-event strategy look like? That coverage look like? How do you get everyone, how do you get the access, in terms of, how does press get access to everything in terms of your content, pre, during, and post? And so I think when I say more work, it's not just like hosting an event and moving on. Everything is digital. And so that just means you need to be able to have a huge post-event strategy in terms of how you take this content and further amplify it.
Does that change the team that is putting together these events?
We did change our team, but it did, think it is creating more opportunities, and so we would need more resources, right? And so we've all been able to pivot in terms of like going and being on our roles and still going digital because we're a digital first news platform. But I wouldn't say it would change the team. I think, in terms of what would change is like, obviously you're not going to work with a venue, you work with a production company, right, to host your events. Those things will change in terms of who you're working with. But for the most part, it didn't for us. And I think for folks who maybe did not have that set up, where the media company was already creating customized ways to work with partners, they would probably need to adapt a bit more, right? So I think that's where VB Lab really, really helped us here in terms of how we work with our partners and go to market, and how we're collaborating internally as well. Pre-recorded sessions, that's a great tool for the editorial team, right? And so, that's another thing to keep in mind. What does your editorial strategy look like throughout this? And how do you integrate that in as well?
Okay. Gina, we're going to leave it there. Thank you so much for spending time with us.
No, my pleasure. Thanks so much for having me. Thanks everyone for your questions.